I'm Ray, it's Monday and welcome to another reading vlog. I'm just having a crumpet because, crumpets. I'm back in England, as you will notice from the change of decor behind me. I thought I would just sit down and talk about my reading plans for this week while eating my crumpet. So I'm going to finally properly read Persuasion. So this last week of July is going to be my very slim contribution to Jane Austen July. Persuasion is the Jane Austen novel that I started reading earlier this year, and I probably have actually read a decent chunk of it, but I'm just going to go back to the beginning and restart it. I listened to it on audiobook initially, but I just wasn't really getting into it properly, and so I felt like I needed to read the text instead, and then I downloaded it on Kindle, but it was a free version and the text was unreadable, and so now I have a proper edition that I'm going to read. Persuasion is the story of Anne Elliot, who when she was younger was proposed to by a man who she was genuinely in love with, but a friend of hers persuaded her not to marry him because she felt that this man was below her status and that she could do better. And the novel then begins when Anne Elliot is, I think she's like 27 or 28, and she hasn't been proposed to by anybody else. She hasn't found any love that matched the love that she had for this other man in her youth, and he then comes back on the scene. That is how the novel begins, and I'm looking forward to it. I have not been an enormous Jane Austen fan throughout my life, and I really would like to be. I don't understand exactly why I'm not, because she sounds like everything that I would love. I watched a video by Katie from Books and Things, which was a recommendation of books to read if you like Jane Austen, and honestly, like, I'd already read most of them, and most of them are my favourite novels, so I don't really understand why I'm not as obsessed with Jane Austen as everybody else is. Like, all of her books that I've read so far, I've liked. I haven't disliked any of them. They're probably all like a 3.5 star kind of read. Like, yeah, I enjoyed this. It was fine, wasn't wildly into it, probably wouldn't rush to reread it, but it was enjoyable while I was there. However, there is clearly something about Jane Austen that everybody else like latches onto and absolutely adores, and I would really like to find that. I know that if Jane Austen wasn't so famous, I probably would have just read one of her works and then been like, okay, and never read anything else, but I keep coming back and trying because I want to find that love for Jane Austen, which I feel like I ought to have. That's my plan for this week in terms of what I'm reading book-wise. And then on my audiobooks, I'm listening to a couple of audiobooks. I've got The Inimitable Jeeves by P.G. Wodehouse. I've got the Stephen Fry collection of Jeeves and Worcester on Audible. It's like 40 hours long and it contains a range of different books, and kind of unfortunately for me, the one that it's starting with, The Inimitable Jeeves, is literally the only Jeeves and Worcester book that I have already read in my life. However, I couldn't be bothered to skip through and try and move on to the next one, and I'm just kind of listening to it as background listening anyway, because they're not complicated at all. They're just really charming, lovely background listening kind of reads. Like, I'm listening to them as I fall asleep a bit, and it's lovely for that. If you're not familiar with the concept of Jeeves and Worcester, it's basically a story about this guy called Bertie Wooster, who is an absolute kind of super duper upper class idiot, and all of the sort of scrapes that he gets into, and which his intelligent butler Jeeves gets him out of. That's pretty much the plot, and you just get like repetitive short stories that feature this structure, but they're really, really funny. It's set in, I think, the 1920s-ish, and the language is just full of British 1920s-isms, like what ho, that kind of thing. Is really funny, really charming. I've always really wanted to read Jeeves and Worcester because when I was growing up, my dance teacher was really obsessed with him, and she named all of her dogs after him. She used to have these Pekingese dogs that she absolutely adored that would come along to our dance lessons and like walk around the room while you were dancing. You'd have to dance around them. One of them was called Bertie and the other one was called PG, and then I think at a later point had another one called Bingo, who's another character from Jeeves and Worcester. I just think that was like such a delightfully British thing to do, and I really loved her, and I always think of her when I'm reading the books. And then the other thing that I'm listening to is Yours Cheerfully, which is the second novel and has only just come out. It came out last month, and the Dear Mrs. Bird, I think it's going to be a series from what I read. I think there's going to be another one after this. Dear Mrs. Bird I listened to on the plane coming back from Congo a couple of days ago, and I really enjoyed it. It was in some ways really light and cheerful and fun, but in other ways actually quite moving and perceptive, and looked at female friendship and like genuinely looked at the hardships that women faced in their lives living on the home front during World War II, and at how little human errors can kind of blow up on a grand scale when life itself around you is so difficult. And I was, yeah, actually really impressed by it. I wasn't expecting it to be quite as deep as it was. Like, not that it's a deep novel especially, but it was really emotional and moving, and I just felt it was very well done. But I actually thought that Dear Mrs. Bird was a standalone novel, and then when I went to review it under Goodreads, I discovered that there's been a sequel just written that came out last month, and so I have bought that on audiobook and I'm listening to that. So far it's just a continuation of the plot. So our main character, she's working at a women's magazine, and it's about how she's sort of trying to help the war effort through her journalism for this women's magazine, plus what's going on in her personal life and in the personal life of her friends. Really enjoyable. I've listened to maybe about half an hour's worth of that so far today, and it seems very similar to Dear Mrs. Bird, which is kind of exactly what I'm after. That's my reading plans for this week. I am in 10 days of isolation because we've just got back from overseas, so I don't have obviously any social plans for this week, but I am planning to use the time as best I can to actually do as much like to do with video making for this channel as possible, because once this 10 days is up, I'm basically launching into a solid couple of months of doing a lot of visiting people and friends and family and that sort of thing, and I'm not sure how easy it's going to be to find time to make videos for my channel during that time, so I want to do as much front loading as I can. So that's basically my plan. I'm not sure that this vlog is going to be particularly exciting, but it's really lovely being back in my parents' house. It's lovely being in the UK. I feel like much as I love living in Congo, this channel's vibe and like my personality is definitely a lot more cottagecore UK kind of thing, and so it's lovely being back in that environment. And I'm also going to enjoy being able to join in with Jane Austen in July a bit this month, and I'll do my kind of Persuasion reading vlog as we go along with this week. Something that we're both really excited about is food now that we're back in the UK. In Congo, like, food isn't difficult. It's an exaggeration to say that it's difficult, but we've got a HelloFresh box has come, and that's like one of those food recipe boxes thing where you get all the ingredients delivered. And I'm so excited for the convenience of just having all the ingredients and the recipe that I need delivered to my door so that I can just cook them straight away. Other little things that we're really enjoying is just the weather. Look at this. My mum's garden is absolutely stunningly beautiful, as I'm sure you can tell. But it's just such a nice temperature, and we have to have the air conditioning on so our throats aren't constantly dry. And yeah, it's really lovely to appreciate the things that you sometimes forget to appreciate when you're living in a country. Now to get unpacking the deliveries. I'm gonna have this tonight. Lentil and kidney bean veggie chili. It's Wednesday and I just wanted to mark the happy occasion. This should be the last time that you see me filming on my phone because look, I got a real camera. It's got one of those screens that flips out to the side and everything. Ta-da! So hopefully everything that you see on my channel now will look a lot nicer than all the stuff that I've been shooting on my trusty but pretty old iPhone. Hey, it's Thursday and I had this idea that I was really excited about, that I wanted to dress up in kind of period dress. I know it's not exactly Jane Austen, but the closest thing that I had, and go out in the garden and have like a picnic and read my book out there for a while, because I can't believe that I actually used the word because obviously that would be incredibly fun. But it's actually just really cold outside. It's grey, the sun hasn't come out really all week, it's been on and off raining, and the ground's wet, and I also just know that I'll get cold, so I was feeling quite sad about my lack of ability to follow through on my plan that I've been looking forward to doing, and then I decided to just do the indoor version. So today I'm going to sit indoors in this little plant room that you've seen before. This is where I've been filming while I'm at home. I'm gonna sit in this room and pretend that it's a picnic and read my book in here for a bit. Before I do though, an update with how I'm getting on with my reading this week. I'm now about halfway through Persuasion, and I'm still not yet at the point where I left off the story when I was listening to it on audiobook before, so I realised I must have listened to more of the audiobook than I thought that I'd listened to. Not that much has happened in the plot, which I think is why I thought that I hadn't got through very much of the audiobook. I'm actually finding, which I've surprised myself by, that it's quite hard to follow who all the characters are. I don't think there's that many characters, but they all seem to be related, and I keep having to search up who they are and who's related to who, because there's just a lot of hanging out with relatives, and everybody seems to be the brother or sister in law's brother or sister, and I've been trying to work out which families are linked to which families, so it's been quite nice to be able to read it at a bit of a slower pace and pause and make sure that I'm actually following what's going on with the characters, even though with the plot there's not that much that's going on. Honestly, I was really hoping that when I sat down and properly gave solid attention to Persuasion, I would find that I would love Jane Austen, but it just hasn't really happened so far. I literally fell asleep reading this the other day. I'm not that gripped by the story. I like her observational writing style. There's definitely been some sentences in here that I've really enjoyed. I really like the character of Anne. I think she's a great protagonist because she's not perfect, and she made this terrible mistake when she was younger by allowing herself to be persuaded by a friend to not marry the person that she wanted to marry. So yeah, there are aspects to it that I'm enjoying for sure. It's not that I'm not enjoying it, I just still am not enjoying it as much as I thought that I might do, as I hoped that I might do. One thing that I'm intrigued to see explored is this character, Lady Russell, who is the friend who initially persuaded Anne not to marry Captain Wentworth when she was in love with him. And we're constantly told that Lady Russell is a really nice person and basically is all around great, except for the fact that she's a little bit snobbish and cares a bit too much about class. But we haven't really spent any time with her yet. I'm intrigued to see whether later on in the novel she kind of justifies herself and we come to understand why Anne sees her as such a close friend and has so much faith in her, when so far all she seems to have done is this one terrible thing. I'm gonna keep going with it. I've not lost faith yet, and I am enjoying it well enough, but quite averagely. Like, I'm enjoying this very averagely. I am, in fact, enjoying it probably a bit less than I'm enjoying Yours Cheerfully, which is the audiobook that I'm listening to by AJ Pearce about a girl who's working for a women's magazine during the Second World War. And this is very light, very cheerful, really upbeat read. Very similar to the first book in the series, Dear Mrs. Bird. It manages to keep exactly the same voice, which is really nice, and I'm intrigued also to see where this goes, because in Dear Mrs. Bird I found the first half was really cheery and upbeat, and then the second half was a lot more emotional, and so I actually kind of feel a bit nervous because so far in this book not loads has happened. I feel like we are seeing some growth in Emmy. I feel like she's grown from the first book and we're seeing her doing better at her career, and that's all really lovely. And I honestly feel so proud of her. Like, I feel like I'm her friend and I really care about her doing well, and it's so nice to see her having grown and got better and kind of improved her judgment from when we first met her at the beginning of Dear Mrs. Bird. I'm intrigued and a little bit nervous to see what happens next. I'm kind of worried that everything could go drastically wrong. I don't really know. It doesn't feel like that's necessarily going to happen, but we will see. So let's do a little bit of reading Persuasion now. Maybe I'll enjoy it more having dressed for the occasion. and welcome to my end of the week wrap up. Regarding books, I finished both the book that I was reading and the book that I was listening to this week. So starting off with Austen's Persuasion, this did pick up for me since I talked about it earlier on in the week. I definitely found it more gripping in the second half. I thought it had a really romantic ending, like I really loved the proposal in this one. I continued to find Austen's insight really witty, quite scathing to be honest, but very entertaining, and overall I liked it. Has this book converted me to being a complete and utter Austenite who adores Jane Austen? Unfortunately, I really wanted it to, but it absolutely hasn't. I feel like I just had the same response to this that I have to every other one of Jane Austen's novels, in that I found it overall quite a nice story. I think the problem for me is maybe actually just the specific class of people in the specific time period that Austen writes about. I find when I'm reading about these upper class women in Regency Britain that their lives just seem so boring, and I get the point that she's making, that it's really miserable to be a woman who has nothing else to do, except there was a good line in here about how women's feelings are stronger because they have nothing to do except to sit at home and mull them over. But I just don't find it that interesting to read about. I think I prefer reading about women who get to do a bit more stuff in their life than sit around in a drawing room hoping that a man who's handsome and kind will propose to them so that they can sit around in his drawing room for the rest of their lives. Like, it doesn't excite me in the way that a lot of other books do. I think there are other aspects of Regency Britain that I would really enjoy, but this particular setup of women of leisure looking for a husband I don't find particularly gripping. I also feel with Austen's heroes that I just don't get to know them very well. So Captain Wentworth, I think it was in this one. Obviously he's nice and noble and that's made clear, but I didn't feel like I really had a huge grip on exactly who he was and what his character was. And I remember so clearly the first time that I ever read Jane Austen. I'd just read Jane Eyre, that was the first classic that I ever read. And when I finished it, I was like, classic literature is for me, I love this. And I went on to Pride and Prejudice, which is spoken of as a romance, the same way that Jane Eyre is spoken of as a romance. And they were such poles apart, and the characters felt so much more distant to me in Pride and Prejudice than they did in Jane Eyre. And I still feel that now. Like, I like Jane Austen's observational style, but I also feel like I read quite a lot of books that have a similar level of observational style and at the same time more character depth and more gripping plots. And I know that this is a sacrilegious point of view because I'm pretty sure that probably everybody who watches this channel absolutely loves Austen and thinks she's the best, because everything else that I like suggests that I should like Austen with that same passion, but I just don't. I like her. I gave it 3.5 stars and then I rounded it up to 4 on Goodreads because it was an Austen. I did enjoy it. Would I reread it? Maybe, but not in a rush. Will I finish reading all 6 of her works? Probably, but not in a rush. This was a nice book, but it just didn't stand out to me, and I feel like Austen is supposed to stand out. And I am somebody who can read quiet, subtle books and really enjoy them, and they can be standout literature for me. So I'm sad that this didn't turn the tide for me in my love of Jane Austen, because it's been many, many years since I read an Austen, and I thought that coming back to her in later life, things might change. Then the other book that I finished was Yours Cheerfully by A.J. Pearce. As I mentioned before, Dear Mrs. Bird ended up being a hugely emotional novel, and I actually went into this almost feeling a bit scared of all of the emotion that I'd felt in Dear Mrs. Bird, and worried that that was going to be a part in this novel as well. But Yours Cheerfully was a lot more what I expected Dear Mrs. Bird was going to be. It was really bright and jolly and cheerful all the way along, and like obviously things went wrong, but I didn't feel like things went wrong in such a drastic or painful way as they did in Dear Mrs. Bird. This novel really focused on the plight of women war workers and was actually a topic that I hadn't really read about or known that much about before. Obviously I knew that there was a big call up for lots of women to work and to contribute to the war effort, but it explored how much of a problem this was for mothers because there was a lack of childcare available for them, and if their husbands died then they ended up on a war widow's pension, which was nowhere near enough money for them to be able to live off without them also needing to work. I like the whole message to these books that we have the power to make a difference in the lives of others by doing our jobs well. So Emmy initially in Dear Mrs. Bird goes into working for this women's magazine, which is not what she wants to do. She doesn't feel like she can help the war effort by doing that. Her initial response is, oh no, I've made a terrible mistake, I need to get out of here. But then when she actually focuses on it, she finds that there are huge ways in which she can help and support the women readers. And that theme very much continued into this novel. It was really nice. I also gave it 3.5 stars. I probably wouldn't reread it, but it was a nice book to read. I enjoyed it. It was a good audiobook as well. Both of them were really nicely narrated. So that rounds off my reading for this week in isolation. Thank you very much for joining me on the very quiet day-to-day life that has been this last week. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like and subscribe for more similar content. I make lots of daily life reading vlogs and also bits and pieces about intentional living. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you very soon in another video. Bye bye.